Welcome to the University of St. Francis Alumni Panel Diversity Discussion. Again, I'm Melissa Eastman, Director of Alumni Relations, and I will be your host and moderator this evening. While diversity is a very broad and deep topic, tonight's conversation will focus on racial diversity and how it's been experienced at USF and beyond. Tonight, we have four spectacular alumni panelists who will be sharing their perspectives and experiences. In attendance this evening, we have a really great mix of students, alumni, faculty, staff, and friends of the university. As a community of lifelong learners and in honor of our Franciscan value of reverencing the unique dignity of each person, I invite us to begin tonight with a moment of prayer. Divine, please be present in our dialogue, that we may be courageously vulnerable and humble as we strive to create a more equitable, inclusive, and charitable world within ourselves and in our communities. Amen. Now, the fun part, we get to talk to our alumni. Our alumni, I'm just going to do a brief introduction of our alumni, and I really would like them to speak for themselves. So, Quila Pettis, she has earned a Master's of Organizational Leadership in 2017. I also have Armando Bustamante, sorry about that. Armando Bustamante earned a Bachelor's of Business Administration in 2012 and a Master's of Business Administration in 2014. Darian White earned a Bachelor's of Business Administration in 2007. And Carolina Flores earned a Bachelor of Arts in 2015. So, while those introductions don't do them any justice, I really would like to hear them in their own words. So, Quila, can you start us off tonight and share a little bit about your background, how you got to USF, and what you're doing now?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Quila Pettis, and I am an alum of University of St. Francis. It started off, I was a mother of 7 children, and I was a stay-at-home mom. And I came from working, and when I decided to go ahead and stay home, it just didn't sit well with me. So I said, in order to do that, let me just go to school and get an education. That way it kind of justified being a stay-at-home mom. So I started going to school, and I went and did undergrad. And by then, all of my children were in school, and I was a cougar mom. And by cougar mom, I mean not a cougar mom. My daughter, she was enrolled in the University of St. Francis, and she was on the basketball team. So I had known about St. Francis for 2 years. By now, I was already working, and I was seeing University of St. Francis up close and personal. So I decided to go back and get my master's. And as I started searching, I said, why not go to school with my daughter? I had to check with her and see if it was okay. And she was like, yeah, it is. So I'll never forget when we went for the first time to get registered. And we went to the bookstore to pick up our books. And I told her, I said, don't be surprised if I end up being more popular than you. And so we laughed about it. But I graduated in 2017 with my master's, and she graduated in 2017 with her bachelor's. We walked together, we graduated together, we were 3 rows behind each other, and it was an amazing experience. I was an online student, so I wasn't on campus, but University of St. Francis was great. The experience, the exposure, I would do it all again.
Armando, want to follow that up?
Yeah, hey, Armando Bustamante. I am a 2012 and 2014 undergrad and MBA graduate from the University of St. Francis. I am locally grown. I'm from here in Fort Wayne, went to Concordia High School. Again, love the area, been here for quite some time. I did go to college at Indiana University. I played football there for 2.5 years, but really didn't enjoy how big it was and really didn't feel at home. Ended up coming home and transferring back to the University of St. Francis to finish up my education as well as my football career. And from there, I've been here ever since. For me, it was such a great experience at the University of St. Francis. It was, in all honesty, just what I was looking for. It was personalized. I've always felt at home. Any type of questions I've had or help. When I was a student, I felt like I was always welcomed with open arms. And to this day, again, obviously, I keep a great impact at the university. I still talk to the coaches, the teachers, the faculty, alumni. So, yeah, great to be here. And again, looking forward to a great discussion.
Darian.
How you guys doing? Thank you for having me tonight. I'm glad to be here. Glad to be able to talk on this topic with all the alumni and future alumni, hopefully, and some faculty and staff. So I just want to say my thanks for allowing me to speak. My name's Darian White. Like Melissa mentioned before, I graduated in 2007 from the University of St. Francis with a bachelor's in business administration, and I have a minor in speech. My story is I grew up in Chicago, Illinois. I moved to Fort Wayne when I was a freshman in high school. And for some of you kids out there, I'm not from 63rd. I know some of you guys know what that means. The other ones don't, but the kids probably do. But I moved here in 98, freshman year high school. I went to Southside High School. I never played football before moving to Fort Wayne, Indiana, because the area I grew up in Chicago was not the greatest area in the world. And I had to walk through some unsavory territory, gang territory, to get to football practice. So I couldn't play. So the first thing I did when I moved to Fort Wayne was I wanted to play football. So my freshman year in high school at Southside, I played. 4 years later, I got a scholarship to play football for the University of St. Francis. So that's how I ended up at St. Francis. I also played baseball at St. Francis. And now I'm 36 years old, married, 4 kids, working. I work for a company called Millennium Packaging. It's actually an outfit that's out of Chicago, Illinois. And I'm charged, me and one other business partner, with expanding their business interests into Northeast Indiana. So that's what I do now in my professional life. I'm also a football coach for the Bishop Lewis High School. So I'm coaching receivers over at Bishop Lewis High School.
Great. Carolina?
Hi, everyone. My name is Carolina Flores. As Melissa said, I graduated in 2015. I studied political science and legal studies. And then I went to law school in Bloomington. And before that, I grew up partly in Chicago and partly in Northwest Indiana, so Michigan City. Yeah, so we'll talk about that later. But yeah, so I am here in Fort Wayne practicing law for an AmLaw 100 law firm in their nationally recognized labor and employment group. I'm also involved in a lot of litigation, and I'm excited to talk to everyone today. I think my path to USF was a little sort of different. My dad is from Mexico, and he's a very traditional Catholic man, and all of the women in his family did not leave their house unless they were in fact getting married. And of course, I was asking to leave my house to get an education. And he already heard, that IU, Purdue, those are party schools, definitely would not let my daughter go there. And I convinced him to visit St. Francis. It was a very quaint, campus, and they gave him a golf cart ride around campus, and we felt like it was a good compromise. And it was an amazing experience for me. It was a place where I allowed myself to grow personally. I learned how to be more of an academic, and yeah, I don't regret it at all. So thanks for letting me be here.
Thank you. That's awesome. You guys have touched on this a little bit, but some of the questions that have come up from our attendees is, what was your experience like at USF? And while you guys focused on really some of the great parts, and obviously it was because you guys graduated, but, was there ever a time you wanted to quit? Did you ever experience non-support here? And what made you stay, and how'd you get through it? Darian, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll kick it off. So when I came to university, this was around 2002. So I don't know if that dates me compared to some of these, but just to give you guys an idea of the time frame that we're talking about. So 2002, I come to the University of St. Francis, and I came from Southside High School. And anybody with any knowledge of Fort Wayne, typically the stigma around Southside High School is that it's a more urban school. It's the most diverse school, I think, in Northeast Indiana. It might even be in a larger area than that. So coming into St. Francis, I was well diverse. My family is a diverse family. I have an Asian brother-in-law. I have a white sister-in-law. I traveled internationally. I've been to China, I've been to Africa, I've been to London. So I've seen different cultures, and none of that stuff was a surprise to me going in the South Side. Coming into St. Francis, it was a little bit different. It wasn't the same. There was typically a natural segregation on campus. And I don't know if it still occurs this way, but I know when I went there, it was like all of the nurses and people in the medical field were in one area. All of the artists and some of those liberal arts were all in one area. And then they had the business in another area, which naturally, I mean, that's how most campuses are designed. You want to keep the like-minded people together. I think that, though, spilled off into the social life on campus. So my freshman year, I didn't stay on campus. I stayed off campus because I was from Fort Wayne and wanted to save a little bit of money. So I would travel into campus, but I would stay on campus with friends who were from out of town. I had a couple friends who were from Florida who were staying on campus, and I would, found my time hanging out with them. And it felt like a lot of the times on campus, there wasn't an inclusive environment, not only because there was segregation between the educational portions of it, but there was also segregation between the athletes. So the football players kind of hung out together in their own right. The soccer players did their own thing. The basketball players did their own thing. And there was a natural animosity between them before coming in. It was like when we came in, if you were a football player, you hung out with the football guys at the football house off campus. I don't know if they still have that. Some of you kids, if they don't ask about it. So yeah, long story, a lot of long nights there. But it was already naturally segregated between the athletics and also with the academics as well. And I feel like that spilled off into the social life. So when you saw campus, the cafeteria on campus, it was segregated the same way. If you walk through, usually the athletes were on one side, the people who were there just for education were on another side. And I think some of the experiences that I had, one thing that's really difficult to do is to assume someone's intent. That's difficult to do. Without someone saying that this was done for a certain reason, it's hard to assume that it was. But there were several things that would happen when we were on campus that I would say would be an anomaly. Maybe they aren't things that happen all the time. And I think part of it too, when I look back on it, it could have been warranted. So I know coming out of in 2002, part of the culture in being an African-American, some of the things that we were into at the time were big cars with big rims with big speakers in them. And so I had a big car with big rims and big speakers in it. And I would show up on campus and I'd have my music playing and, my car's kind of attracting attention. And it felt like the other people who had similar vehicles like that, we were always getting extra attention. Now, obviously, how can you complain about getting extra attention if you're kind of causing that? Again, goes back to my point about proving intent. But it did feel like, we were picked on a little bit more. Told to move around. There wasn't a lot of congregating in the parking lots. I remember being kicked out of lobbies of the dorm rooms. Sometimes we would just be hanging out down in the lobby and they would kind of usher us out of there. I can remember in person, those are just instances on a broad scale. For me personally, I know that when I first showed up at St. Francis as a freshman, I was on the baseball team. I had walked on the baseball team. So I wasn't brought there on scholarship. I actually came over on scholarship for the football team. I walked on to the baseball team. And at the time, there was only me and one other Black player on the team. We had an incident where there was a practice that was called, and some of us missed practice, and other ones made it. They posted the practice on the door. I was living off campus, so I ended up missing it. Me and some other players, but they ended up kicking me off the team. So there was other people that missed the practice, and I also missed the practice, but I was kicked off the team, and the other ones weren't. So. And then, so I started having some conversations with the other Black kid on the team, and I asked him, how did he get there? Was he brought there on scholarship, or was it on his own right, like me, where I walked on? And he was a walk-on too. So he had actually called and contacted the school about coming there because he was going to come there for academic purposes in the first place and want to know if he could play baseball. And so I found that odd that you would have an entire baseball team with nobody of color on it. And then you're kicking somebody off of it. That is, again, I can't prove intent. He's never said to me that was the issue. It felt like it though. And from some of the other tones and things on campus and, dealing with him personally, I felt like there may have been some issue there. I can't point to any one thing on campus that happened where I would say that was absolutely racist or I felt like there was some prejudice against me. So I would have to say that overall experience was not that bad, although there were some things that came out over time that you couldn't prove that were racist or prejudiced.
Well, let me follow up with a question with that, Darian, because you say you don't feel like that it was outwardly racist, but yet, you have said, in some of the attitudes it didn't feel inclusive, that it felt segregated, and also that you were felt treated differently, that there was assumptions made about you. Is that really different? I mean, is that just, are we talking about implicit bias now, right? Because
I think so. Yeah. Oh, one of the other things too that I thought was really interesting was how athletes were treated in the classroom. So when I first showed up there, I was always been serious about my academics, but there was an idea that, and I may have been just with the football team because I only know it from that perspective, that we were just there to get kind of a bullcrap degree. So there was an implication that we only wanted the classes that would be deemed easier or the entry levels, that we weren't really trying to push it academically. And I actually got that from teachers. I kind of got that feeling from teachers that they would imply almost coming in like, oh, you're just going to do the minimum, right? And that was never the case. But in talking to other people that have graduated from there, as an athlete, as football players, they all felt that too. So yeah, I think sometimes there are things that are underlying. They might not be overt. Like nobody ever said, they never called us niggers or anything like that. But I think there was a lot of things that were just assumed, maybe some bias, maybe some prejudice in there. Absolutely.
Anybody else have anything to add on that one? Quila, I have a follow-up question on that one. Do you feel like online learning, since you're not really seeing anyone, was helpful to you? Because you were not judged by your skin because people didn't know what it was.
Right. Absolutely. Even when I think of inclusive, the online program at University of St. Francis to me is the picture of inclusive, because you have people from Texas, you have people from all over and all walks of life. But I remember the very first time signing on, I purposely didn't put my picture on. I don't know why, but I think in the back of my mind, I knew why I wasn't going to put my picture on, because I didn't want to, I didn't want that stereotype. But then maybe after about 2 weeks, I did go ahead and put my picture on because my name is Quila. You can look at the name and see that, that I was an African-American. But one thing that I did discover is while going online, we had to learn to respect each other. We saw so many differences among each other. And I think that was the actual picture for me that showed how life is really supposed to be, how we all didn't have the same answer. When we get on the board and we have to write make our different posts to the people, to me, it taught us how to accept others' differences and see a different viewpoint or a vantage point from some other than what I had. And that I was able to take something, learn from it and glean from it and put it in my pocket, tuck it away for when I'll need it again.
That just breaks my heart that you felt like you couldn't put your picture on. I'm glad that you shared that. I think that's important to verbalize that for other people to appreciate that is your experience and not just your experience.
Yes. And the bad part about that is I love taking pictures. I take pictures all the time, and I have so many pictures, but it was that thing that I did not want to put my picture.
Thank you for sharing that. Mm-hmm. What has helped get you to where you are, and what advice would you have for other students of color who want to set off in a similar direction? And this gets a little bit in the weeds, but how do we diversify a candidate pool when hiring, even when we're talking about what professors you see in the classroom and staff? So can you speak to that, Armando?
Yeah, so I saw this question on there, and so I actually forgot to mention what I do. So I'm a partner here in Fort Wayne with New York Life. A lot of my job is hiring, developing, and training. So that's a huge part of my day-to-day is the hiring portion. And so from that standpoint, how to ultimately widen that scope, it has to, it's not going to happen overnight. It has to be from a stage of, you have to network, you have to put yourself in a situation that will allow you to open those doors, right? So what I mean by that is you can't just assume or look at, let's say we're talking about hiring, looking at the same old places that we used to, right? There's got to be ways where, again, networking events, cultural market events, going out and really spreading yourself as thin as you can, right? In as many markets as you possibly can, to expose yourself to different individuals, right? Because if we really rely on kind of our past ways, whether it's hiring, whether it's looking at sales processes, right? Things have changed, times have changed. And when it comes to the diversifying the employment or whatever, I truly do believe you've got to put yourself out there. It won't come naturally. You have to, again, market, you have to spread yourself out into those communities, right? If that makes sense. Yeah.
Being a person of color, does that change how you present yourself? Does that change what perceptions that you feel that you will have to entertain from others?
Yeah, I would lie if I told you that, and again, so I meet with a lot of business owners or so forth. I would lie if I told you that walking into a meeting that sometimes I don't think about my skin color, right? And unfortunately, it is what it is. It never really scares me, but I think about it, right? And the fact that I have to, again, for me, it's one of those things. It's just natural. It's just kind of how I am. Just again, with society, right? And again, not that it's good or bad. And for me, a lot of times walking into a meeting, it's probably just me, right? And so, but having that stigma in my head, yeah, I mean, I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about it, right? Walking into a meeting and again, it's predominantly white business owners, and I'm walking in and they see this, Armando Bustamante. I'm Colombian. My mom's half white, half black, right? I've got a tan skin. I would lie to say if that never ever that thought didn't come into my head, right? And so now again, at the end of the day, in today's society, I think you really have to. You can't let that hold you back. For me, it's one of those hurdles where, in all honesty, I feel like that you just got to attack head on. If it is something that's in the room, a stigma, then great. I mean, it is what it is. It's not going to change my presentation, the way I go about my day to day. There's not a whole lot I can do to change the dynamic in that room, right? So say I'm stepping into that room. So really, and then kind of diving into it a little deeper, I just feel like their education is the only real way that we can hopefully progress. But again, it's just one of those things where, unfortunately, and again, I'm not speaking for everybody, but unfortunately, it's definitely comes to the forefront of my mind when walking into a room or a meeting or a business event, whatever.
Armando, can I piggyback on you?
Yeah.
Okay. It's funny that you say that, because when I first entered management, I had already had my undergrad, but I would lead with that because I knew I was entering a room and I was the only African-American female. So somewhere in the conversation, I would make sure to sprinkle in there that when I went back to school and got my bachelor's degree, and then when I did my master's, I made sure to sprinkle that in so that other people knew, oh, she's educated.
Yeah.
But sometimes that's self-inflicted until I became comfortable. And then even undergrad, we had to take music appreciation. So I found myself pulling out some of those things so that I can be versed and be able to communicate with others, just to prove and show. So was it a pressure from them? No, but it was one of those self-inflicted things, just to show that I'm worthy of being here.
I'm going to jump in there too, because I think you're absolutely right. And I can't help but think about growing up. I remember once I heard my dad, his office voice. So the office voice is how we answer the phone when we're at work. And it's completely different than how we answer it if it's our friend calling. And so that just keeps bringing me back to how sometimes walking into a room, knowing that you're a minority going into a room, you're going to try to do whatever you can to make yourself seem less unassuming, to be unassuming, to fit in, to use a term, we want to assimilate. And so, and I think that comes from, obviously, we all have PTSD from long histories of dealing with racism and prejudice in the United States. And so, obviously, out of slavery, the first thing that they want to do once they had free Africans was to assimilate them. And their idea of assimilation was, we're going to just make you kind of carbon copies of us. So we had to talk like them, we had to walk like them, we had to wear their suits, we had to drop whatever garb we were wearing, and we needed to be as close to them as possible, but just be a different color. And I think sometimes we still act in that manner. So that's why we have the office voice. And, we present ourselves a certain way in those rooms like Armand is talking about. And I've been there before. Me and Armand, we go back. I've been in that space before where your client base is predominantly white male. And I've been in rooms where I walk in and I can almost tell immediately that I might not get that deal. Like there's a feeling when you know who it is you're sitting across from and kind of how they're presenting themselves to you, that there may be something that preceded you before you were ever able to start talking. And that's unfortunate, but it happens all the time. Like I mentioned, I played baseball. And in baseball, and we talk about, and I heard, I'm sorry, I didn't get your name, Miss Pettis. I heard her talk about being we talk about self-victimization is what the word she used. And that happens a lot. And so I mentioned the story about the baseball program when I first came to St. Francis. So I have to really be careful. So when you ask the question of whether I thought that was if I thought that incident was racism or not, I have to be careful that I'm not self-victimizing, because I had spent so much time in my life on baseball teams where I was the only Black player and had just gotten used to the jokes, the little innuendos, all the things that happen when you happen to be the only person of color on the team or in a room. And where it's a camaraderie thing. So everybody's kind of loose and being themselves, but sometimes people reveal who they are. And even in those spaces, you find yourself trying to do whatever you can to be more like them instead of being more like you. And I think that's important for this conversation because we're talking about inclusion. And so inclusion now is different. So assimilation, you're trying to be like the majority, right? Inclusion is you can come with whatever garb that you already had. You don't have to dress like us. You don't have to look like us. You could just be you. And we all are here on a common ground for a certain purpose. And you can bring yourself as you are. And I think that's what the conversation that we're trying to talk about here is being more inclusive. But we still have a little bit of PTSD and some of that self-victimization that we carry with us from years and years of having to deal with it. Played baseball on the track. We went to China, and even over there in China, just the way you're treated over there is completely different than you are in the United States. I've been to Africa. How you're treated in Africa is completely different than how you're treated in the United States. And it seems like there's a systemic problem here that we have. It's so I know we're talking about diversity and inclusion, these initiatives, right? And it just seems like if we're going to make it an initiative, that means it's mandated. That means you have to do it, and it becomes something that you just have to do. Another thing that you just have to do. So we were talking about hiring and how you diversify in hiring. We need to make sure that we're dealing with the person who's doing the hiring and making sure that they're a decent person. So I think you start there. So, and to get more diverse candidates to apply for the job, the people who are doing the hiring, I think those people need to have not have prejudice and not have issues with diversity and inclusion. So if we get rid of the systemic issue, which is environment, really, because nobody's born racist or prejudiced or homophobic, that stuff is all learned. So I think it's about changing the environment. And I think my answer to that question would be, when you're talking about diversity and hiring, you have to start to change the environment and the people that you have in the company. And then that will then reflect in the type of hiring that you're doing.
Yeah, you guys talked about this a little bit as you're walking in the room. And so that really is a great lead in into our next question is, as a person of color, what assumptions do people make about you? And how does that shape your interactions, which you guys have talked about, the office voice and changing. So, what are those assumptions? And for you, that might be an obvious thing, but putting a name on it sometimes is important. So those who aren't even aware that they're doing it know what it is. So what are those assumptions people make about you? And then the flip side of that is, how should a minority or person of color avoid that self-victimization mindset?
I can hop right back in since I was already talking about it.
Yeah, you queued me up real well. Thanks, man.
Right.
Keep going.
Well, so I figured I'll go ahead and take us to the first swing at it here. But yeah, so when you're just talking about assumptions that people make, we run into this stuff all the time. And so obviously when I mentioned before, I said I have 4 kids. So in conversation with people, I've had people say, well, is it all the same mom? Do you live with the kids? It's almost like they assume that if I have 4 kids, that some of them have a different mother, or I'm not with them. Like I'm not in the house. Like I'm looking at my kids right now. They're over there doing things. Yeah, I wish they'd be quiet, but they're not. But yeah, so there's that assumption all the time. People think that my kids don't live with me. Like I have multiple baby mamas. When I was an athlete, again, I was talking about an assumption made that people didn't think I was serious about getting my degree. That they thought I wanted all the easy classes, like I just wanted an easy path to a degree because I was really there to play football, when really I was there for a degree and I just happened to be playing football. So there's assumptions that precede us all the time when we go into rooms. And one way that we can avoid having a self-victimization mind state is, well, usually that mind state is rooted in something or an event that happened where the person was actually a victim. So a lot of times it has a solid base to it. But then what happens is it starts to create a mind state where you become defensive all the time. So everything is heightened now. So although something that might not be racist, we'll automatically tag it as such. And so we have to really be careful about that. Like I mentioned before, we're all suffering from PTSD. We have to stop blaming, and we have to start forgiving ourselves. And I think that's the first thing is we have to forgive ourselves of the situation or whatever caused us to have that mind state in the first place. And then after that, we need to do our own homework too. We can't always assume that that we're the victim, like there's something that's happening to us. Sometimes it's our own self that's causing issues in our own lives. And we may be pointing to that as being the reason, when it's really something that we need to take care of within us. And I think a lot of times, if you start there with the situation and you find out what you had to do with it and how you may have gotten yourself in it, then I think that you can get outside of the whole self-victimization cycle. You're just stunting your own growth, and at the end of the day.
Carolina, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, I'll piggyback off of that. I agree with everything you said. I think that and it kind of goes back to the other question of like, how did you get to where you are? You gotta, and this applies for everybody, right? You gotta regularly take out the mental garbage, regardless of where it's from, whether it's within you, past experiences, microaggressions. In order to succeed at your goal, you have to brush off, things that are in the way of that and things that are distracting for your goal. I think one thing that helps is just, obviously for me, anytime there's like a microaggression faced, I go running. I drop my name, I drop my title, I drop where I am, because, all of us in the room who are attendees, you're going to be future very talented professionals. And, who cares sort of what assumptions people are making about you? At the end of the day, you're living your life, you're doing what you want to do. And you wouldn't be successful if you keep paying attention to other people who honestly don't matter. So that's what I do. I take out the mental garbage, regardless of where it's from. I surround myself with people who have common goals, and I ignore people who make really bad assumptions.
That's good. And I'll just add on to that. For me, I've heard for years that the angry Black woman, and being in leadership, and in my position, I'm a facility administrator. I'll never forget when I went to interview for that, and I started doing my research before I interviewed, and I noticed that a facility administrator mostly were men, because to be that, you have to know about when you know, the outside things that typically like husbands or men know about. Like, so I have to find out about who's taking care of the furnace or anything where I am. So I had to be a little stern, but I found myself trying not to be too aggressive, you know, because I didn't want to be deemed as the angry Black woman. So, but what I had to come up to and realize that I just needed to be authentic. And once I became authentic in who I was, I put down everyone else's. I stopped carrying what I knew other people, you know, what their assumption was. And I was just free to be me at that point.
Yeah, oh, sorry, Melissa, did I interrupt you?
No, go ahead.
Okay. I had a recent experience. I won't say at what court, but you know, to get into court, everybody goes through security, the metal detector, right? And when you're an attorney, usually you have just access to go right in, like TSA pre-check, if you will. I was stopped by the security guard and he was like, "You're too young to be an attorney. Let me see your attorney badge." Like, no attorney has to do this. You're walking in with a suit and a briefcase. You're clearly there for business, right? And, you know, for a second, I was like, all right, here's my attorney badge. I have no problem producing that for you. But, you know, and then he made a joke about how, like, you're too young to be an attorney. So at some points, it's just too exhausting to figure out, like, what part of my intersectional minority category are you trying to, you know, identify right now? Is it that I'm young? Is it that I'm Mexican? Is it that, you know, I'm brown? Like, which is it? I can't figure it out. Let me just tell you if you'd like to know, you know? So it's too, like, it bogs you down too much. I think if you focus on it too much, but you know what? Like, I went to my hearing, did what I had to do, and that guy's still going to be working the security stand, you know, and maybe continuing to make assumptions, but I can't carry that for the rest of my day. I need to get on with my day. So, but everybody faces, I think, microaggressions, and it's our job to just take out the mental trash.
Well, let me ask you about that, Carolina, because what I'm hearing is that, yes, all of us have our own mental garbage, you know, be you, be authentic. I mean, that is for everyone, everywhere, no matter what. But what the common theme that all four of you are saying that is an added layer for someone of color is that there is an added layer that other people, well, white people don't have to carry around. And perhaps the beginning is realizing that there is maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more layers that other people are carrying that should not be there. So yes, we all need to do our due diligence, but there's an extra layer in that one. I want to take a minute to actually encourage our attendees to put questions, comments in our chat feature. We'd love to pull you in a little bit more if you'd like. Please feel free to do that as we keep having our conversation here. Darren, you talked about this a little bit, but I want to open up the next question because we're talking about, okay, what is your experience? Well, okay, what we ultimately want to get to is this inclusive environment and community. So what does diversity and inclusion mean to you?
So it's funny because I'm kind of split on diversity and inclusion as an initiative rather than just diversity and inclusion in general. And it's probably been because in different jobs that I've had, seems like there's always a corporate initiative for diversity and inclusion. And I kind of alluded to this before, but it feels like it's more mandated than it is that I think it needs to be more organic. When it's mandated, it just becomes red tape and people just make it something else that they have to do. You saw some of that happen with affirmative action or maybe the Rooney Rule in football, where now there's a mandate that you have to hire, you have to interview African-American candidates. So what's happening now is there's qualified coaches who are just getting interviews just because they have to cross off that line. And it's not because they actually consider them to be a candidate for the job. It's just because I kind of have to do that or I'm going to get in trouble. And so I think we really need to be careful with the whole initiative part of it, although the initiatives are probably needed, though. So it's a fine line that you have to walk there. But to be honest about it, you really shouldn't need to have a diversity and inclusion initiative, really what you should just have is a diverse and inclusive campus, right? And I think that's what we're trying to get to, is diverse and inclusive jobs. People who don't have those type of issues who are making the decisions. And I think in order to start there, if I were to, I have a quote from Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein said, and I'm gonna paraphrase, he says, "The only remedy for prejudice is enlightenment and education. It's a slow, painstaking process." And I think that's important, because I think what you do with the initiatives is you're giving people information, you're giving them education, but you're not giving them enlightenment. And I think enlightenment comes from experience. You have to actually get out and see this in action and put it to use. Getting people out the office and getting them into environments where they might not feel comfortable. Because diversity and inclusion, like that name, is really a way to just feel comfortable about talking about racism. We don't want to say racism. So instead of saying racism, they just say diversity and inclusion. And honestly, and you mentioned it, you kicked this off, and I'm glad you said that diversity is actually a pretty broad term. When we start talking about diversity, you're actually incorporating a lot of different things. And and that's fine, because all of them have their own dog in the fight. There's issues on all fronts. So you have the LGBTQ issue, you have the race issue, now you have income inequality, you have the whole women's right movement, but all of this has to do with diversity. So you can easily go down the rabbit hole in a lot of different directions, but how much are you actually getting done? And I think the underlying root issue here, and the one that tends to be where my heart's at, I mean, I love all the other initiatives too, and I'll support anything that I think needs to be done. But the racism, I think, is the root of it all. I think once you start to take care of that, it almost will start to take care of the rest of it. And it's because you're talking about creating environments for children to grow up where that's not being taught to them. And so I honestly think that there can be some bad to the whole diversity and inclusion initiative if you're not putting people in experience. And to be honest, that's why you saw so much things change when you saw George Floyd. People have been saying for years that Black people were being killed by the cops. They've been saying this for years. This was no surprise to anybody that this happened. The difference was that you saw it on camera. And so when you tell somebody, hey, Black people are getting killed by police at an alarming rate, that's information, right? So I can take that in. I go, okay, I'll take note of that, right? But until I actually saw it on TV, and now I get my heart involved, I see that, I have empathy, which is something that's also missing. But that helped to re-educate people when they saw that this is actually a real thing. I saw it with my own eyes. Well, a lot of us on here, we've been seeing stuff like that our whole lives. We've experienced it before. I got pulled over the other day for absolutely no reason at all. None. No reason. Didn't get a ticket. It's just sometimes they just fish, They'll try to pull you over just to see if your registration, your license is okay. Maybe they smell something coming out of the car. They're just going to try it. And I think until we start weeding all of those things out of the system, the entire system needs to be broken down and rebuilt. Honestly, it just needs to be. I talked before about how you come out of slavery and you have a simulation. The whole idea was to get us to be like them before. Now, since we've deemed that not to be the right route, we want to go with the more inclusive route. But we've been going down this route since the civil rights. And then there's an issue with the civil rights. That started out as being an issue about race, but then all these other things, these other initiatives got added to it, and it became entire civil rights. And so again, I think we need to be more deliberate in tackling specific issues rather than lumping them all into one and then looking at it from a high overview and feel good that we're having a conversation, even though there might not be real work being done. So what I want to make sure is that even if we're having this conversation, that there's real work that's done out of it, and it's not just educational, that it starts to become where people gain empathy, where they can change their environment, where they can re-educate themselves. That's where the change happens. That's what I mean by breaking it down and building it back up. It's a destroy and rebuild. And I think right now it's just two things that happens when you talk about diversity or inclusion. You have the people who are the victim feel like when there's a diversity and inclusion initiative that I have representation now. So if I'm a minority, I know a company has diversity and inclusion initiative, I can be comfortable and go, okay, well, I feel like I'll be represented and I'll have a voice at the table. And then it's from the other end, from the perpetrator. And the perpetrator gets to feel like, oh, well, if I put in a diversity and inclusion initiative, I feel better at the end of the day for maybe some things that I've done wrong in the past, or maybe some ideology that I've had in the past. But how much is it really doing if you're spending an hour? And this is from other jobs that I've had where we would go and spend an hour in a room. We will watch a video that tells you it's okay if people wear hair garbs. It's okay if, you know, that person doesn't talk like you or dress like you. And you leave that meeting and you go walk back to your cubicle, and then you spend the whole rest of the week going back into the same environments that you came from. So until the environments start to change and people have experiences, I mean, take people out to the south side of town. Go take them out there to the food lines. Go take them out there to the kids that don't have it. You know, they don't have book bags, the book bag drives that they do every year on the south side of town. I think that's when you'll start to create some real change. Although it's a two-part system. So yes, you need the initiative, you need the education, but then you have to have some action behind it too.
Armando, you got something to say?
Yeah, I was just going to put back on that, Dan. You're absolutely right. I think we can't move forward if we just stop it at that hour meeting that we were talking about, right? It needs to go further, and I agree 100%. Until we put ourselves in other shoes, right? You're never going to really feel how they feel or felt or all the above, right? And so I think moving just past that and actually going out there and putting yourself forward into those communities, it's got to be that next step, right? If you just leave it where it's at, this system's just going to be on repeat and nothing will ever change, right? And again, no offense, but, you know, no one's really felt, and again, from the white community, what us minorities have had to go through, right? And it's tough, you know, from my parents' parents, right? And no one's had to really deal with that from the white community. So now, again, that doesn't mean you can't help change it, but I just ultimately feel like you're not going to really get change until you start making some action, right? And start including yourself in Darian. And you're right, going back to the Rooney Rule, I'm with you, right? And for those of you that don't know the Rooney Rule, Darian explained it, that every NFL team has to interview a certain percent of minority coaches before they make a coaching decision. And at first, you know, and I'm with you, Darian, it feels like, okay, yes, let me interview them, get them out the way, and then I'm going to hire this white coach. I truly do feel like it could be good and bad. Now, it really does come from the top, though, right? And I feel like if from that standpoint, if they're just doing it to just get through and hire this, you know, coach that they really want, nothing will change. Now, I do agree with it from the standpoint of it allows coaches that may never had the opportunity to move into that role, to get that first interview, even if if they're not ready for it, they're getting exposure that they don't have before, right? So I think that they mean well. I think the Rooney Rule really it's moving in the right direction. I just think that it all comes from the mindset. Are the people on top, are they doing it because they have to, or are they truly wanting change, right, inside of the community? So I agree. Everything you said, Darren, great. I just, again, truly believe you can't let it stop at that hour meeting. You have to go out and experience it, be uncomfortable. You mentioned that, you know, get comfortable with the uncomfortable, right? It's just one of those things that if you're only in your little bubble, you'll never learn, right? You have to step outside of your boundaries and get a little bit uncomfortable to experience things that you've never felt before, if that makes sense.
Well, let me ask you this. You know, we throw around diversity and inclusion. We talk about, you know, some initiatives, how that feels, what needs to change. But ultimately, what does inclusion look like if we're successful? Does it mean you don't have to have an office voice? Does it mean, what does that look like? What does inclusion look like when we have successfully done it?
So when I looked at the question of what does diversity and inclusion mean to me, I don't know how many years, maybe 10 years, it's become real big, diversity and inclusion. But when I really look at it, if it's done right, it needs to be flip-flopped. It needs to be inclusion. And then with the inclusion, we'll create diversity. And with that, I was at an event and Paul Porter was there. Paul, if you're on, hello. And he made inclusion and diversity so in my face that I was like, I get it. When we think of diversity, we thought racism, a black and white thing. But he opened up my eyes so much that it's gender, it's color, it's the size of a person, it's sexuality, it's the economic status, what side of the railroad did you come off of? And I believe if we focus more on inclusion and understanding, inclusion to me is understanding and knowing that I'm going to interact with people every day that are different than me, that come from different backgrounds, that talk different than me, that bring another flavor, that I know that I'm going to interact with them, and I'm okay with that. Because what would a world look like if we were all the same? I mean, how would that look? But if we embrace inclusion, diversity follows. And I just think we should flip-flop it and not put so much value on the diversity part and put it more on the inclusion and be okay with that.
That's fantastic. I believe we have some questions coming in. Let's see. Natalie, are you able to unmute yourself? I think she had a question.
Yeah, thank you. So in a professional setting, and this is coming from a female perspective, I was asked, do I give trust or does somebody have to earn it? And I thought that's an interesting question. And I kind of thought, do I always have the opportunity to say, well, you have to earn it? And so I'm curious if you've ever found yourselves in positions where, or situations that you were forced to just give trust instead of require a person to earn the trust because you were underrepresented or whatever the situation was. And then what is your view on trust?
Christina, okay.
Carolina, anybody jump in? Go ahead.
I'll go.
For me, okay, go ahead.
Yeah,
go ahead.
So the great Natalie Wagner. How you doing, Natalie? It's good to hear from you. But yeah, so when you're talking about trust, I think if anybody who has children, you understand that you can't always have them earn the trust first. Sometimes you just have to trust them, and I think that happens in a lot of things in life. If we always had people earning trust, then how do you base your trust? What is your criteria for if they've earned it? That's my question. So at what point is it does that switch over and now they have your trust? So I think you have to almost give trust first and allow somebody to lose the trust rather than you give them a criteria to meet first before you feel like you can trust them. That's just my opinion on it. But I think ultimately, though, when you're talking about the workplace and trust, you can have trust in a workplace if you have empathy. And I'm going back to this empathy thing. And Armando actually touched on it when he said that sometimes you haven't been a minority, you don't know what that feels like. And I always use this analogy, and I tell people, if you walk by a dog and that dog is starving, right? You see a starving dog, your humanity alone will tell you to feed that dog. You don't ever have to have been either starving or been a dog before to know you need to help the dog. So you don't need to have been in our shoes before. You don't need to have been abused by a police officer before to know that there's an issue that needs to be addressed. So I think empathy is a way around, is a foundation for trust. So if you have empathy between individuals in a group setting, if you have empathy in your office and everybody in there has an open heart and is willing to hear things from the other person's perspective, like Armando said, to walk in their shoes, then trust is just something that will come about. It will be a byproduct of that. Just like I think that inclusion is actually a symptom of issue of diversity. If you have an issue with diversity, you have an issue with inclusion. Like that comes out of that. That's a symptom of. So I think that a symptom of empathy or of empathy is trust. Trust is a symptom of empathy. I think you start with empathy first.
Quila, did you want to add to that?
No, he wrapped it up really
Okay,
good.
got it. Okay, awesome. Well, we do have some questions coming in, but I also want to be mindful of time. If we're getting to the 8 o'clock, if you do need to log off, thank you very much. However, our panelists have been very generous to hang with us a little bit longer. So feel free to continue with the questions. And Jared, I've got a question coming from you. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask a question?
Yeah, so mine's really not a question. It's more of kind of just what you guys think. So we talk about this inclusion and all that, and I'm looking at our Franciscan values, and our number one is reverence the unique dignity of each person. And to me personally, like kind of what you guys were saying earlier, that like stigma around campus, like just the kind of different groups. I feel that too personally. Like, no, I'm not collared or anything, but I'm in the PTA program and I do feel that stigma around people. And I feel like not everyone values everyone the same. Another one is serve one another, society, and the church. And I feel like in a way, like we have these values, but we don't hone in on them. We kind of just say them at the beginning of the school year. Everyone hears them once, like during like a syllabus kind of thing. And then we just let it go. I guess my thing is I want to like challenge like everyone and especially the school to like really focus in on these like Franciscan values, because it's like, for me, it's like I do want to grow spiritually and like with the community, but it's like when I hear it once, I do kind of just back off after I hear it. And it's like, I feel like I'm not doing enough. So it's like, I guess like, what are your guys' like points and tips to like, to get the most out of like these values and like just out of like, I guess to bring it all together in a way?
I'll jump in here.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Mine will be very quick. You know, we live in a world of social media, and we live in a world of challenges. There's a challenge every week when we go on to social media, and it's a challenge. You know the saying, be the change that you want to see. If each individual one of us would take that Franciscan value and be accountable, and then challenge our friends, everyone that we are connected with, and hold each other accountable, make that a challenge. And then, you know, and so if we do that one at a time, we can win one at a time. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Jared, I kind of agree with what you just said. It just starts with you, right? Like, I think my freshman year, I said hi to literally everyone I walked past. I know it's a little strange with COVID and masks. You can't really see people's, facial expressions, but you can say hi to everybody that you walk past, introduce yourself. You're from a different discipline, but that doesn't mean you can't talk to like somebody from nursing or an artist or whoever else. So definitely make it a point to just talk to other people, break outside of your circle. And then I think you'll start to feel that community. And then, I was involved in SGA, so I feel like I got to, talk to people across all kinds of disciplines and faculty. So if you're not involved in a student group, which I'm sure you are, definitely make it a point to diversify whatever student groups you're a part of across campus. I still kind of walk around like I'm running for the mayor of nothing, just introducing myself to people, because I think that's kind of the way everybody should just be, friendly and open to new relationships.
Carolina, I love that phrase. That's hilarious. I've never heard that, and that's beautiful. I love it. Running for the mayor of nothing. That's great.
Yeah, and I'll jump on that too, because I completely agree with everybody said on this topic, because I think it needs to be a push from both sides. So you need to have the university pushing toward the students, and you need to have the students pushing toward the university at the same time. And when I was there, I'd admit I didn't push back toward the university, even if I didn't feel like the university was pushing enough. And if that's how you feel, there's more than enough opportunity for you to push toward the university. I mean, that's how change is really made. It's somebody an individual at a grassroots level pushing and causing change on their own. So you can be the mayor of nobody and go on campus and like really start to cause some change. Ask the right questions, meet with the right people. I do know that the university is moving in this direction. Of course, they brought on Dr. Porter. and he's involved with the diversity and inclusion. So maybe that's somebody you can sit down and talk to, and he can get you involved in, and you can start to be an ambassador for the students on campus. I don't know if they have one, but maybe that's something you go to them and talk about. And then also too, I heard that recently they've put a whole room in there where guys can go in and listen to music. I was on a different panel like this for athletes that we did, and I heard that they had a whole room there now. I'm like, that's different. We were getting ran off of campus. Now they're inviting you to come there and play your music. I think that's excellent. It's giving you a place to go where you could be yourself. So I think you should take every advantage and take advantage of those options and go talk to Dr. Porter. But don't ever forget to push from your end, because I didn't do that. Instead of us pushing, we said, oh, they don't want us on campus. So we just all moved off campus. That was how we fixed the problem, was to run from it. It wasn't to push. So I would encourage you to push.
Well, thank you. Well, we are at time. Oh, wait, I got another question. Let's see. Paul, do you want to go ahead, or would you like, let's see. Okay, when we as a university do recruiting, well, actually, Paul, why don't you go ahead and speak for yourself?
Okay, can you hear me? All right.
Yes.
So when we as a university, we do our recruiting, we do our teaching, we do hold events. How did we, and quite honestly, we're mostly white faculty and staff across the board, how did we somehow convince you all to take a chance with us? What was it that made us even a possible option?
Well, for me, my daughter was already going there. And so I enjoyed seeing what I saw. And I come from a religious background. My husband is a pastor. I did undergrad with another biblical college. And so inclusion and diversity, I wanted to try. I'm Baptist. I went to a Wesleyan school for undergrad, and now I'm going to try this Franciscan thing. And when I saw like when I saw the syllabus and the things that we were talking about and the biblical principles that you were laying out in class, that's what attracted me to you all. But then when I would be on campus, Sister Elise, my daughter was a part of the, we won the national championship in basketball, 38-0 record we had. But when we went there, everyone was so inclusive and it was attractive to me. And not to mention the master's program was one of the best price in town. So I thank you for that.
Yeah, if I could piggyback on that, I think for me, I would also lie to say that joining the football team wasn't my initial comfort zone, right? I think the reason I joined the university, and again, obviously great education, but my comfort zone was football. Now, the time that I started to feel comfortable in the classroom and on campus is really when the teachers, the faculty actually started to, again, after class, discuss with me, see if I needed help, see what they can do to better my experience there. I think after my first year, I felt comfortable both on the football field and in the classroom. The faculty, all the above. I felt like, you know, again, wasn't maybe my initial approach, but from there, you know, again, just the way I was treated, and, you know, kind of alluding back to what Darian said, you're right. You know, there's that stigma of, hey, they're here to play football. But, you know, I think, again, what you're saying, if we're pushing on both sides, the teacher and faculty are pushing the athletes, and the athletes want to learn, and they're asking questions, they're staying after class, they're getting the help and education they need. For me, that created another comfort zone that not only for my undergrad, but then allowed me to basically feel comfortable coming back for my MBA. And again, glad I did it. So.
And I think what you're saying, Paul, is you would want to see St. Francis be a school where in Fort Wayne, Indiana, kids are wanting to go to St. Francis just to go to St. Francis. Like, I just want to go to St. Francis because I think St. Francis is cool. And I think in order for you to get there, and what's funny about that is I have a friend. So I have a friend that went to Indiana State. And every year he wants to go back for the walk. There's this thing they do down in Indiana State called the walk. And every year for homecoming, he goes back. I had not been until I started doing these, until I started getting reached out by Natalie and other people with the alumni office. I wasn't really going back to games much. I did for a few years here and there, but it really wasn't a thing where I felt bad if I missed a homecoming. Like, and I'm looking at my friend and he's like upset if he can't make it down for homecoming. And I think we want to get the university to that level where we have alumni, we have kids that haven't come to St. Francis who just want to go to St. Francis because it's a place to go, because it's a, and not maybe not just cool, but we feel like we're included there. And to start with that, you asked, how do you do that? I think it goes back to that empathy and that trust. We really just need people who care. I mean, that's it. We need people who care and they want to see a difference. And and sometimes that can feel really difficult. Like you're going to take on the problems of the world. You cannot tie yourself up with thinking you're going to save everybody, right? You can't. That's an impossibility. You just need to save that person that's right across the street from you. So if you got a kid across the street who's grown up, go talk to him about St. Francis. If your kid is on a basketball team, talk to them about St. Francis. But you take the kids that are the closest to you, that you already have some sort of a relationship where there's already a sense of trust. And then you can start to massage them to come to the University of St. Francis, where it's not just about sports. Because I'm going to be honest, school transparency, the only reason why I came to St. Francis was because one of my best friends who was a year ahead of me, he went to St. Francis and he came back to school one time with a ring, a conference championship ring. And I saw that ring and I'm like, I want one of those. So that's why I went to St. Francis. Outside of that, I was going to Purdue or IU. That's and St. Francis is right here in town. And I went to Southside. It needs to be a place where that's the first option. And so in order for you to get to that level, I think everything that you're doing right now is definitely steps in the right direction, but you have to get to the part where I was talking about action. So if we started seeing St. Francis represented at Metro football games, if you start seeing St. Francis represented at the Boys and Girls Club or at the Weiser Park Youth Center or at the McMillan Center, if there's representation of St. Francis in those places, and then you're going to start to build that trust and start to have those kids be on their mind when they go to choose their college.
Thank you. Oh, it looks like we have one more question. Powell, are you still there? He had his hand raised. I don't see him now.
Yeah, I'm here.
Awesome.
Sorry about that. I didn't get on time with the meeting, so this topic might be covered. But my question is that, with the current political situations and the many complicated situations that we're having, do you guys think that the issue of this, the issue concerning this minority community and the other social problem is because people tend to give actions, positive or negative, to a political side instead of acknowledging that someone accomplished that actions. Instead of seeing people as a person, we tend everybody started to see people as sort of this sort of a group, this thing is accomplished by this group, and then this thing is accomplished by this group, instead of we human did accomplish this. I'm not sure if you guys could understand me.
Yeah, I'll jump on that. And I think you're right. I think what ends up happening a lot of times is we tend to be a polarizing society, especially if you're dealing with politics or religion. Those two things are just going to put people on opposite sides of the room. It's just the way it is. And even more so nowadays, you're just being encouraged to pick a side. It's almost like everything that you see, whether it be social media, and with social media is a whole nother issue, because now you're actually giving people platforms that probably don't even deserve platforms. And I'm just saying on a minor level, not like the president of the United States, but I'm saying even just us individually, I can just express myself any way I want to. I always have a soapbox. It gives me a soapbox all the time. But what that does is it polarizes people. And so we get too caught up in trying to figure out what side of the aisle that we're on. So am I conservative? Am I liberal? Am I a Democrat, or am I Republican? Am I black? Am I white? Am I for cops, or if I'm against cops? It's like Why is it that you have to be subscribing to either side? And what you said is absolutely right. Why does it have to be this group did this or this group did that instead of just humanity did this, right? But that comes from ego. People like to take credit. They want to be the face of things. And until we get outside of ego, feeling like we need to have a leader, we don't need a leader. Everybody could be a leader. And that's what I meant by go across the street and save that kid that's across the street. You do that. And if everybody can do that, then we can build up a change, right? It's not about us changing the masses as a whole individually. It's us taking care of the little bites of the elephant that we can take care of. But I think if you just keep your mind clear of having to feel like you need to tag yourself as being something or something else, I think you can always use your own discernment and take your own information in to make your decisions on things instead of feeling like, because once you label yourself one thing or the other, you almost have to agree with everything that group says. And I think that's what we're running into a lot in politics nowadays, is that if I say I'm this, then I have to go with this, and everything that this group says, I have to be with it, or I'm not that. Why can't it be that there's some conservative ideas that I think are excellent ideas, and there's some liberal ideas that I think are excellent ideas? How do we figure out how to make it make sense for everybody, right? And I think that's what we're losing sight of. Maybe we need to have more than just two parties. I know we have an independent party, but it doesn't really feel like we do, because when the primaries start, you just kind of go back to two parties again. But I think having more than just a dichotomy all the time, that's what we're talking about, diversity, a real group of people getting together to make a decision shouldn't be on one side or the other. It shouldn't be that way. It should be just, let's get together and make a decision. And that leads into, that kind of goes back to what you were saying about people wanting to take credit for things rather than just being about humanity.
Well, as much as I love this conversation and probably could stay here for hours and hours, we probably shouldn't do that tonight all at one time. So we are coming to an end, and I want to say a huge heartfelt thank you for our alumni panelists. You've been spectacular. Quila Pettis, Armando Bustamante, Darian White, Carolina Flores. Not only have you been generous with your time, but also sharing of yourself. And I also want to thank the attendees who offered very thoughtful and poignant questions. I will not lie and say it was difficult for me to come up with these questions. And then once they were there, then all of a sudden, attendees were sending me questions. And I'm like, these are brilliant. Oh my goodness, where were these? So thank you for the attendees for not only your questions, but before this and during the discussion, and your willingness to listen and learn. Thank you also to some of my partners in crime in putting this on. Jane Martin, our Professor of Communication and Director of San Damiano Corps, and Paul Porter, Director of Diversity and Inclusion. They were both helpful. We kicked around these ideas, how we would put these off, and were great supporters and partners in this. Lance Ritchie, our Vice President of Academic Affairs, also made sure that this message got broadcast loud and wide to our students and faculty and staff, and they responded. So very much appreciate his support. And also Kathy Calvin, who makes me look good behind the scenes as if things are all going well. We could not do half of this stuff without Kathy. So thank you, Kathy, for your help tonight. This has been a spectacular conversation, and really I would welcome your feedback further for this topic and potentially to do more panel discussions on this. Like we talked about, this is a pretty broad topic. Do we want to continue having conversations like this? I would love your feedback. You can reach me at alumni@sf.edu. And thank you once again for coming, and have a great evening. Thank you all.